Today we will be discussing The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. If you are on this channel often, you probably know that we start a lot of times with works of either Brandon Sanderson or Robert Jordan or George R.R. Martin or a Lord of the Rings book, simply because we like fantasy books here, so a lot of the times our series start with fantasy. This is going to be a spoiler-filled episode of Lore Archive. We are going to talk about everything that happens in The Way of Kings, so if you have not read that book, you might want to get out of here now. Last warning. Okay, as we get into a little bit about this, if you read this book, you know it's one of the most incredible of all time. This book follows three characters in Kaladin, Shallan, and Dalinar. These are our three main characters that we will be following for, as far as we have written out right now, most of the series. Our main character, our one we start off with, Kaladin, who is who this book is about. Each of his first three books in the Stormlight Archive trilogy go over a main character. This one goes over Kaladin, while the second one goes over Shallan, and the third one over Dalinar. So I just want to talk about each of those three stories individually here today. I think that's the best way for us to kind of break down a little bit of what happened. And I'm going to start with Kaladin's story, just simply because he is the main character of this book. I think his story kind of encompasses all the main things that happen. We'll obviously touch on some of the other stories, specifically Dalinar's, as we go throughout here, but I want to talk about Kaladin's at first. Kaladin's story is one of the most incredible story arcs of all time, especially in The Way of Kings out of his books. Kaladin, if you, for all of you that know and who've read, he starts off as a slave. He's living in a slave caravan by the time we're really starting with him in the books, and we find out he has fallen very far from being such an incredible warrior. He fought with the skill of the wind, earning him the last name Stormblessed. People began calling him Stormblessed. Every time he fought, he lost less men than any other captain or commander, and then, due to circumstances that we don't really hear about, something off screen, Kaladin falls to the rank of a slave, and we find him in a slave cart moving on to what's known as the Shattered Plains. The Shattered Plains is a giant war-strung land with absolutely treacherously deep caverns carved throughout them. 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 feet deep caverns that are carved all throughout these plains. They are fighting on these plains. The Parshendi, a tribal warrior race, lives on this land that the people have been fighting for a very long time. Kaladin is going to the Shattered Plains, not to fight, but to essentially be a slave in this war that the Alethi people, the human people on the plain, are waging. Now, our guy Kaladin, he's not very happy about this. He is rather depressed at this point in the story, and a lot of the rest of the story, but he is really depressed right now. Only thing that's really keeping him anywhere from any kind of comfort is a small fairy that flies around him and seems to be talking to him. He isn't really sure what's going on. He just knows there's a little golden voice flying around his head. Soon we find out that this fairy's name is Syl, and she has been hanging out with Kaladin ever since he was being Stormblessed, watching him, kind of figuring out what he's all up to. She can't figure out why he is so sad right now, but she's trying to cheer him up. In the process of trying to cheer him up, she realizes that he has some leaves on him. Through a little inference in the story, realize these are poisonous leaves that Kaladin, at first we think, might be using to escape. We quickly learn he is considering killing himself as a slave. He is at the point where he is, no matter what's going on, near suicide. He tells us that he is not this in his first time being a slave. We are not like day one of slavery. He has been doing this for months and months and months since he was Kaladin Stormblessed. He has tried to raise revolts and escape time after time after time again, and every time all he does is get people killed around him. Kaladin is very scarred by the fact that he continues to get people that follow him killed around him, and he continues to survive. He has some of the worst survivor's guilt that I've ever seen portrayed in a book, and it very much builds Kaladin's early character. So once he's at the Shattered Plains, he's dropped off by a slave master known as Devlakov. He is at the plains and is commissioned to serve as a bridgeman. And what a bridgeman does, it is essentially the absolute worst job that even a slave can get on the Shattered Plains. He's pretty much put here because he is marked as unruly, as a rebel, as someone who might try to run away with a large brand on his forehead. They see him as someone who might cause a disturbance, so they sent him to the bridge crews. All you do in bridge crews is you run bridges at chasms all day long, big chasms in the ground, and attempt to set bridges there under volley of arrows so that other soldiers, cavalrymen, etc. can get across. This is essentially a death run for anyone who does it, as you are holding a bridge over your head with 10 other men, I believe maybe 20 other men, while you run, carrying a massive bridge while a volley of arrows flies at you. You are essentially the bait for arrows so that other warriors can get in. Being sent here is the worst punishment that you can face in the army, and Kaladin is put on the worst bridge crew of all, pretty much where the cripples and the enemy soldiers are sent, Bridge 4. He is put here and immediately just sees absolute desolation, sees reflections of how he's been acting the last few months, and these bridgemen, they are malnourished and depressed and lost of all hope, every single one of them. Does a bridge run with them, absolute most miserable experience, more of them die than survive, and Kaladin's spirit is near broken. In this time, Kaladin decides to go sit on the ledge of a chasm to contemplate, mostly his life and whether it's even worth living now that he's a bridgeman. When that happens, Syl, our little fairy friend, finds him again and brings him leaves, similar to the leaves that he had been holding when he was in the slave caravan. As we know, these leaves are poisonous. They are essentially for killing yourself, while Syl was just trying to cheer him up. This, in a weird, twisted way, makes Kaladin laugh and makes him somewhat joyful for the first moment in a very, very long time. And at that chasm, he makes a choice. Kaladin chooses to pick life over death, and he walks away from the option to kill himself and decides no matter how bad his situation is, he's going to face it like Kaladin Stormblessed. Guys, this is one of my favorite aspects of the whole book, is Kaladin making the choice in the chasm to face his demons, but not only his demons, but everyone else's demons, to lead them to become the man that he knows he can be and that he had been in the past. It's such an incredible moment for him, and I think everyone that's read this book agrees that the chasm scene where he's looking over the chasm is maybe the most defining moment in Kaladin's character in that first book. But now that he is done with the chasm, he has work that he needs to do. He heads back to camp, where there are more than one bridgeman sitting around doing nothing. They run bridges, they sit around and do nothing. They run bridges, they sit around and do nothing, with maybe a few chores in between. It's no responsibility outside of waiting for your chance to die. And Kaladin sees this as an opportunity. These guys are sitting around with absolutely nothing to do and no hope and nothing to entertain themselves. No wonder they're miserable. So he begins training. He grabs a log from the lumber mill and he begins running it back and forth in front of the slave barracks. Repeatedly. People come out and laugh at him and make fun of him and say he's acting ridiculous, but he continues to run this log repeatedly. Inevitably, people start getting interested. People ask him what he's doing. First one being a guy named Rock. Rock is a Unkalaki, which means he is a mountain man. He lives up in the mountain in a village of mountain folk. He is very different as far as culturally from Kaladin and most of the Alethi, sees what Kaladin is doing, finds great honor in it, and decides he's going to run with him. They begin running this log, and slowly more start joining. Teft and Moash and Drahi and other members of Bridge 4. Now, this goes on for weeks and weeks. No one can really stop them because it's hard to say no to someone just training. Their leader, whose name is Gaz, kind of chastises them for it, but at the end of the day, if they're good at running bridges and they're not stressing him out, he doesn't really worry about them. Problem with this is this makes Bridge 4 very, very good at lifting bridges. They have coordination, they have teamwork, they have discipline, they have physical strength. They're doing significantly better than the other bridges. And they're being led this whole time by Kaladin, who they were trying to put down by sending him here in the first place. Now, they're doing this and they're getting some success, but Kaladin gets very, very, in my opinion, cocky at this point in the story with his success. He decides to teach the bridgemen a move, where instead of running the bridge over their heads, they bring the bridge down to the side for a defensive maneuver to make it easier to run and to block arrows. Now, although this sounds like a good idea, bringing this bridge bound to do this makes the archers that are shooting at them from the Parshendi tribesmen focus on the other aspects of the army, and so everyone else begins falling around them. So Kaladin and his men survive, but basically at the decimation of a large section of the army that they were running with. This pretty much annexes their training. They are put on what's called chasm duty, where they go into chasms, they clean up old dead bodies and refuse and weapons and armor that have been left there from battles that were fought on the chasms previously. They bring these back to camp so that they can be reused, etc. Now, this work is a ton of work and pretty much the most hated task within the army, simply because of danger in the chasms. There are monsters known as chasm fiends down there, as well as floodwaters that run through any time that a storm comes by. This land has something called high storms, as you guys know, and these high storms bring high amounts of water raining down every so many weeks. This floods the chasms, making them very dangerous to be in, and these high storms are unpredictable enough that you can't always know if it's going to be the day that one shows up. So they're exploring these chasms, looking for items, looking for loot that they can bring back like they're supposed to, and Kaladin realizes that he is not only going to be able to train his troops down here, where no one can see them, but there are weapons that will allow him to train them. Fallen spears and swords and things of that nature. Kaladin's always been a spearman ever since he started. He was a storm with the spear was what they called him when he was originally in the army. So he begins training his men with spears. They also begin gathering saproot. They essentially gather roots, plants that are planted in the chasms that will allow them to sell them. They'll sell these little plants to the apothecary in town. The apothecary is really not supposed to be doing business with them, but they sell these plants to the apothecary to get small amounts of cash. So not only is he getting a chance to train his men, he's also getting a very, very, very small amount of cash that he's able to use to do things like treat them to a soup dinner made by rock, or get little bandages that he can use to heal wounds when they get hit with an arrow going and running chasms. And these little acts of kindness and acts of success and acts of defiance against the army are what actually give his men hope and start building them up. After enough time's gone by, he begins giving them soup every single night. They're able to be fed, they're sitting around a fire, they're laughing, and every other bridge crew is similar to the way it started when Kaladin was originally there. Nothing's going good for them, they're in the same way. So inevitably, all of the bridge crews wind up joining in this way of behaving. They wind up working in the way Kaladin and his men work, and the bridge crews become significantly more efficient. Now, that is where we're going to stop with Kaladin's story for this quick minute. So he is running with some decent bridge crews right now. In the meantime, we have a man. His name is Dalinar. Dalinar is the uncle of the king. He is the uncle of the current king of the Alethi. The king's father, Gavilar, Dalinar's brother, died years ago by assassination. That assassin, the assassin in white, killed him at a treaty party between the Alethi and the Parshendi, which is what led to this war in the first place. Now, Dalinar, as being the uncle to the king, runs most of the camp, runs the things that are going on around here. The king is very young, he is still naive to heavy degrees, so Dalinar is the person who's running most of the Alethi army and this assault on the Parshendi. Most of what he's doing when we meet up with him is questioning himself. He's reading a book. This book is called The Way of Kings. And what the book is it talks about philosophy from an ancient king named Noadon. Noadon talks about ruling justly and fairly and avoiding war and fighting when you can't, and not seeking war for only glory, but only doing it for the betterment of your people. These are all very anti-Alethi ideas. The Alethi believe in war and conquest and honor through battle and things of that nature. So Dalinar, struggling with these ideas, is faced with decisions throughout the story. He is known as the Blackthorn, the greatest warrior of all time when he was at his prime, and people see him that way as this great, dangerous, vicious warrior. He even does acts in the very beginning of the book, like stopping a monster's claw with a bare hand, or defeating massive odds that are against him in Parshendi soldiers, or his son, who is one of the most incredible warriors that the army has ever seen, in Adolin Kholin. All these point to him being the ultimate warrior, and the ultimate warrior of the Alethi is now questioning whether what he did and the way he's become was right in the first place. Now, Dalinar has a rival in the camp. His name is Sadeas. Another high prince, another high-ranking officer within the army. He has his own section of the army that he runs. In this section of the army, each section kind of does their own thing. They're under an individual commander known as high princes. And these high princes are mostly doing their own thing in this war. They're going and hunting something on the plains called gem hearts. The gem hearts are massive, massive stones that hold a huge storage of power, of obviously stormlight, that they can use to power their lights and their fabrials, which is kind of their technology, etc. So fighting for these gems is kind of the basis that the war has wound up taken. The gem appears, the Alethi and the Parshendi each individually run to take it. Whichever side wins kind of gets the gem heart, the giant gem, as an award. Now, Dalinar has stopped attacking these gem hearts. He is scared to go to war at this point. Not scared, but hesitant at the very minimum. He fears what he is feeling inside and the changes that are going on in him, and doesn't want to cause any more bloodshed before he understands it. Sadeas, his rival, is beating him every inch of the way because he is using bridgemen, a way of traveling across chasms that is much more effective than the way Dalinar generally does it. He's usually having his bridges pulled by chols, which are like giant cow crab creatures. Every creature in this book is basically a crab. Giant cow crab creatures that move very slowly. So the bridgemen are much more effective, and Sadeas is using them to get an edge on him. And he's not even feeling like it's worth running these battles anymore because he doesn't know if the fight is worth it. Inevitably, he decides that instead of trying to run these battles, he's going to try to unite the high princes of the land. He's going to try to unite the army as one so he can go ahead and end this war. After approaching each of them in turn, he realizes that it's not really getting anywhere with them. Not only do they trust him less, as they've seen he's losing his touch, he's battling less, he's growing older. They start thinking that he may not be capable of what he used to be capable of, but they also all like the way things are going. They're gaining riches, they're getting to earn glory in battle, the Alethi way. But they're not doing anything to end this war. So Dalinar, finally, in a last-ditch effort, goes to his rival, Sadeas, and they decide to do a joint assault on the plateau, the biggest one that they've always lost at. And at this plateau, at the two towers that they go and assault at, Sadeas and Dalinar are in a fight with the Parshendi, the largest fight that we have seen in the whole of the book. Dalinar is dressed in his shard blade, his magnificent, powerful blade and armor that protect him against all damage and allow him to fight at a different level than any other man. The enemy has brought their shard bearers, which are their strongest members of their army, and now we are here for the greatest face-off. As it begins, Sadeas and his men pull out. They leave Dalinar on the plateau, removing their bridges, giving Dalinar no ability to escape and costing him an army. As all seems lost and Sadeas' army runs away, one lone bridge crew sees what's going on. Kaladin Stormblessed and his bridge crew look back and see Dalinar fighting desperately against the Parshendi to survive. And Kaladin says to his men that we have to go back. We have to save them. We can't escape. We could run. We could escape while Sadeas retreats. But we need to go save Dalinar. What they are doing is honorable. We are no better than Sadeas if we leave. And he, with his bridgemen, return, drop their bridge, so there's one point of escape that Dalinar and his men can take. Kaladin, like the wind, hops across the chasms to the other side and fights his way through the Parshendi. He protects not only Adel and Dalinar's son, directing him back to the bridge and helping hold the assault, but makes his way to Dalinar, the final vestige of hope against the Parshendi, and protects him, defends him, and brings him back to safety in one of the most incredible displays of not only wartime prowess, but heroism that has ever been seen in the Alethi army. The bridgemen help Dalinar and his men escape, taking down their shard bearer and removing them from the battle. Dalinar's losses are massive. His army is decimated, but he is alive. Upon returning to the camp, upon the Alethi war camp, he faces down Sadeas, tells him he is going to take these bridgemen with him. Sadeas refuses to release the bridgemen. He says, I will not give you these bridgemen. These are my bridgemen. They are worth the price of a small kingdom. You cannot have them. This was a mistake I had to pull out because we were going to lose. We were being overwhelmed. And I'm sorry, Dalinar, but you cannot have my bridgemen. Dalinar removes his armor and places his sword, his shard blade, the strongest weapon that the Alethi army has in the ground. This weapon is worth kingdoms to these people because of the ability it can give one warrior. And he offers it in exchange for a group of slaves that are malnourished, can't do much, and do not want to run bridges, with a depleted army. Sadeas, looking at him like he's a fool, accepts the decision. Dalinar leaves with Kaladin and the bridgemen. Kaladin is stunned this whole time. He's been betrayed by people in his army. He's been betrayed by people who used to lead him. He's been betrayed by slave traders, and he's been betrayed by every one of power, every Light Eyes officer that he's ever worked with. And now this one man, Dalinar Kholin, is going to be the difference maker. He's going to behave differently than everyone else in Kaladin's life has. Show him the difference. Kaladin asks him why. How can he even do this? How can he trade a shard blade? And Dalinar responds that a shard blade is worth more than anything. It's worth any precious life. And a life to him is worth as much as a shard blade. Every bridgeman life that saved him is worth the same amount as a shard blade. So trading a single shard blade for the lives of thousands and thousands of bridgemen who saved his own is a bargain. Dalinar, showing his honor, points Kaladin to the head of the Cobalt Guard, the head of the guard for not only the king but Dalinar himself. And they move on to rebuild the army, which we will see more of in Book 2. And guys, this is kind of the main story that we are dealing with throughout the story. There is our side story of Shallan, who is studying in the city of Kharbranth. She is mastering magic powers that she has over there, mastering the ability to manipulate elements and matter and change them into different chemical compositions with her mentor, Jasnah Kholin, niece of Dalinar Kholin. So, as we watch Shallan train with Jasnah in Kharbranth, master her powers, understand what she is capable of, we find out that she is becoming a ward to Jasnah Kholin, essentially an apprentice to her, and traveling back to the Shattered Plains to meet with her family and join the rest of our adventure. Now, guys, I know there's more to this. We didn't touch on some of the subjects. I know we didn't touch on Zest Son Vallado, the assassin in white who killed King Gavilar, or Kabzol, who was the ardent, the religious man who tried to murder Shallan and Jasnah and Kharbranth. But this was just a quick 20-minute overhead of the main points of the story. If you were missing the largest points of the story that you need to understand to be able to move into Book 2. Just wanted to recap because you've been reading this book for a while. We know it's really long. These are all the main points of what happened in the story. I know I missed some things, and I know you guys are going to tell me those things I missed. So please let me know in the comments down below. Again, guys, I appreciate the time with me today. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Lore Archive. This is Devin Roberts. You've just been filled in on a description of The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, and we appreciate you being with us here today. Hope you guys have a fantastic day, and thanks again. Peace.